Welcome to the Pastors Podcast. This is Pastor Scott with Pastors Brian and Matt.
Hello.
Hey.
And today, we thought that we would fulfill your greatest desires.
Yep.
I think that everyone in the world right now, particularly in the church, is just thinking to themselves,
Yep.
people aren't talking about politics enough.
That's what I was thinking too.
You know what we need to do? I want somebody else to talk about politics.
We've got our pulse. We've got our pulse on the heartbeat of the church.
Is that what we have?
Yeah.
You put the pulse on the heartbeat?
Yeah, is that what it is?
Finger
We got our
on the
finger
pulse.
on the pulse. What is the what
Finger
is
on the
phrase?
pulse of the heartbeat?
Yeah, you got the finger. We got the pulse on the heartbeat.
There's no heartbeat involved in the phrase.
It's finger on the pulse.
It's just the first two.
Yeah, but there's a heartbeat involved in the pulse.
Yes,
right?
that's accurate.
Okay. Well. We starting
Game,
over
set,
again?
match.
No.
Oh, we're going. We're just going.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about politics.
Yep.
And actually, as a church, we're going to be talking about politics for the next
10 weeks.
10 weeks.
10 weeks.
Right? We're jumping off into a sermon series, a 10-week sermon series on politics, which I think begs the question, are we crazy? Right.
It's come up.
I mean, this seems like both in one sense a really needed thing, but also a really bad idea.
Yeah.
So why in the world are we doing a 10-week sermon series on politics?
Brian, why did you insist on doing a 10-week sermon series on politics? In case it goes poorly, we can just blame you for the idea. It was really not your idea as a standalone thing.
What?
But
So, okay, that's actually a good question because I've been working on it for, a long time now, but where did it come from originally? Like, what's the genesis of
calendar
all of
meeting.
this? That's what it was.
So
you're right.
yeah, I mean, I did. So 3 times a year we meet together, pastors, staff, and a few key leaders, just to talk through the plan for the year. Those are worthless now, we've learned, because you plan a year
What?
ahead.
Oh, okay.
No.
I mean, the meetings were worthless.
No.
People invest a lot of time and energy.
No. I'm just saying.
If you're a part of those meetings and you're a key leader,
you're not worthless.
yes.
What I'm saying is plans that extend 12 months. Any plans we've made in the last 12 months that extend 12 months are worth it.
For example, what was the primary focus for 2020 for the
this
church?
is so good. We were about middle of March. We were about to jump into a sermon series on missional hospitality.
Yes.
On hosting
Getting
people in your
lots
home.
of people into your home, sharing food, hugging,
Yes. We
Lots
had
of
a
greeting
whole
one another with a
physical
holy
closeness.
kiss.
multiple months on just sharing food.
It's a sharing indoor space.
Yes.
That was our plan. We had a whole sermon series for that lined up.
We totally did.
Yeah.
We totally did.
And there's still an argument that there's some usefulness to that, and we could do that another time. But those plans did not come through.
They didn't. But this one has, and for a few years now, as we brainstorm with, particularly on those meetings, even with other key leaders, as we brainstorm with key leaders, one of the things that keeps coming up over and over again, and in just our normal conversations, is a sense of a need for a Christian way to view and to engage with politics, because I think a lot of us feel like the ones we've been handed are problematic or overly simplistic, and we have a diverse church in a whole host of different ways, and we have a diverse church politically. And I think it begs the question, wait, like, are we doing something wrong? Like, is there a right political way forward? How do we even think about these? How do we engage about them? And I think that actually right now, it's more than at any other time in my lifetime, I think Christians are really confused. I think Christians are really confused about how to engage well, how to think well, when in a increasingly divided and increasingly divisive political world. And so that the topics come up a few different times. And I think, Brian, part of where this came from is in those ideas, we've said, oh, we should do a blog about that or a blog series about that. And then everybody's like, that doesn't sound like a great idea. It's like, well, maybe we'll just do a summer seminar on it. And we're like, that doesn't seem like a great idea. Like, this just seemed so big and complex and multifaceted that the more and more we thought about it, I think the more we realized that it lent us. If we were going to provide leadership in this area, it was going to require more investment and more time so that we could explain things and the multitude of nuances involved. So I think, at least as far as my memory goes, I think that's where I remember it coming from.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, I think that's and that's probably one of the reasons that we're so focused on it right now, is because we try and pay attention to what people are struggling with. And while most of our sermons over the course of the past 10 years, 15 years have been going through books of the Bible, and trying to kind of not have the world around us dictate what's most important. When you let everything around you set the terms on what's most important, that can be not great to do all the time. There's plenty of times when that is the right thing to do, and this seems like one of them, where, kind of in a world where everything has gotten so politicized and so divided, that what's a Christian to do in that space? And that seems like a question that's on a lot of people's minds from a variety of opinions and backgrounds, and it just seems really common. It cuts across a lot of differences people might have with each other. They're all kind of united on the fact that this is a crazy time to be navigating a space like this.
It's interesting. I think it also begs the question, what ideally we would have this conversation in person, right? We would, and when we first,
a podcast where everybody's watching us.
No, not this conversation.
Oh no, okay.
Not
not this exact conversation.
Not this exact conversation.
The political conversation.
The political conversation.
They have podcasts where people there's audience members. I know my sister has gone to some podcast recordings. Do you think we could do that at some point? Are we big enough?
Nope.
Okay.
I don't know.
Don't you want to see how the sausage gets made?
So, okay.
I'm surprised I wouldn't listen to this at all.
We say it every time. Why are you listening?
Why are you listening? So so ideally though, when we originally had this idea, the idea, I just said idea 3 times in 8 words. The idea was that we would do this in person, be able to engage with one another, be able to have discussions and follow. This seems a lot harder.
Yeah.
Be in our separated virtual context. Why still do it? Right? Why still do it in the midst of everything going on?
I mean, the big elephant in the room reason is there's an election coming up. And so things are only going to get more heated. Waiting until the time when you need wisdom to navigate things the most is kind of past. Not that this wisdom won't keep going. I mean, obviously it will, but it seems like one of the times that we really need to be able to know how to conduct ourselves, what kind of posture to have, how to think about things that are going on around us, and what it means to be a Christian in this time and a Christian witness in this time, is the time when things are the rhetoric's heating up. And so to wait till later seems like to miss the opportunity when people need to be equipped the most.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I think the reality is that if we as Christian leaders, and we're leaders within Cornerstone West LA, right? So that's kind of our sphere of influence, and why we're focused on a sermon series for our church and our people at this time. We know where you're at. We know what's going on. I think the concern is because there's so much information out there and so much politicized rhetoric, as you're saying, Brian, on all sides, that I think the concern I would have is if we don't speak about it or don't give guidelines, that basically whatever the world is saying on whatever side you're on, or whichever of many sides you might be on, can fill that void. And unfortunately what ends up happening is I think a lot of Christians get really informed or formed in their political thinking, not from Christian perspectives, but from political ones. And they might have a cloak of Christian ideals on them, perhaps, but it's not actually formidable, deeply rooted theologically convinced principles that are guiding them. It's political principles.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's been this conviction, right? I think that increasingly we felt like to not do anything, to not say anything, is to let the voices in the world be the teachers, and it's kind of to say like, oh yeah, that's right enough that I don't need to say anything, and I don't think we feel like that's true. And my hope is actually over the next 10 weeks that we're going to surprise in some ways all of you. Right, that no matter where you're coming from, no matter what your background
Surprise is the word you chose, not anger.
No,
or,
no.
Okay.
No, 'cause we're a family.
Oh, okay.
We're a family.
And families don't get angry at each other.
No, they do.
Okay.
But they call it surprise.
Oh, okay. I was so surprised when you didn't do the dishes, Matt.
Sounds familiar. So, no, but I mean, I our hope actually is that everyone, like, that we will all be challenged and grow closer to Christ through this, wherever we're coming from. Which I think, though, begs the question, why, Brian, why 10 weeks? Like, why not just like 2 sermons?
Right, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I get that.
I mean,
One before the election, one after.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, 10 weeks is a long time.
It is a long time. And there's lots of reasons for that. I know there's probably plenty of pastors who will do 1 or 2 or maybe none, and I don't want to cast any aspersions at other churches for like not. So it's not like this is like the perfect way to do it, and anyone who's not doing it is doing it wrong. But to me, there's a lot here, and what's crazy is we're not really touching in this series on certain specifics, on certain like. Here's the relationship between how the church and the state in a republic, like we're not like going into these like political theory, political theology things as much. It's not like 10 weeks on let's talk about Augustine's City of God and let's talk about these historic sort of more theoretical things. What we're talking about is the posture that Christians should have, the wisdom they need, and the understanding they should bring to a politicized culture that's about to have this really divisive election. And that takes a long time because it's not just, there's several things here. On the one hand, kind of to Matt's point, like if you think about social media or news media or any media of any kind, like newspapers, like anything, and you think about the amount of time that you spend on those, and even if you are really
Brian looked at me when he said that, by the way, just as a heads up.
No, not the whole sentence, just the you.
Yeah,
just when he said you.
If you think about how much time you spend.
I mean, to be fair, there's only 2 people in the room. It's these 2 or the wall.
Yeah, so I think I'm sensitive.
I'll look at the wall. So
he did this morning call me partisan.
That word did come out of my mouth.
It did.
It was Parisian.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Because I do feel that way sometimes.
Baguettes everywhere.
And bicycles.
Little basket on the front with the baguette in it. If you think about, even if you're someone who really restricts, and this is the you I was looking at you for, so you actually do this, who restricts their time on those things to a pretty severe degree. So let's say that you're someone who's really careful about how much input you take in from these sources. Once a day, once every other day, there's a good shot you are still getting more input from those sources than you spend in the Bible, in prayer, and on a Sunday morning. And it's not just that you stay neutral there. So like, it's not as though, well, I stand neutral in the middle and I can choose to lean towards sort of churchy things and spiritual things, or choose to let these other things affect me. What you do affects you because it's happening to you, no matter what, all the time. There's no way around it. And so there's a way that, and this is a larger conversation in some ways, but there's a way that those things are forming you without you being like, I'm choosing to be formed by this right now. It just is in the water. And so that happens to you. And so for us to say, let's do 1 sermon on how to think about politics and just throw you back into that water doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It feels like we need to really sit and immerse ourselves in a more formative experience. That, to be fair, when it's just 10 sermons and not accompanied by a lot of in-person conversations, a lot of other forming practices, is not what we'd like it to be, but those can also come later. It makes sense that doing 10 weeks and ideally following that up with, or even in the midst of trying to find ways in, kind of a city that might still be on lockdown of some kind, to find ways to do those formative practices is a way to get yourself in different water that's shaping you in a different way.
You know, it's interesting that I would almost compare it to Christian teaching on sex, where where there's when the church doesn't speak and provide a comprehensive, theologically grounded teaching on the topic of sex. There's so much input from the world, even if you're purposely trying to avoid it. Yeah. There's so much input from the world that forms your view of it that you need to have. We feel on that topic as well. We feel that the church needs to speak on it. That you need to have a corrective recalibration around what God says on the topic to be able to actually understand His design for this thing, whatever it is.
One big piece of that is the imagination of it. I think that's part of why spending time is important. Like that, it's not just let's give you 10 weeks of information. In the same way that I think a lot of people, it's a great analogy because a lot of people do have grown up in the church, have all the information they need for a Christian sexual ethic. They don't not like, well, I don't know what the information is. And sometimes people try and pare that down into sort of argument form. It's like, okay, well, here's the Bible's authoritative, and here's this verse, and here's why it says this, and so
don't do this.
Yeah, and then then the argument back is like, well, let me pick apart that syllogism and try and get some space to, and that's never the point. Is we need to be as Christians presenting a positive imagination for what the Christian sexual ethic looks like as a way of human flourishing in the world. Like you need to see it, not just know it intellectually. And in the same way with politics, the water you swim in is the kind of water that doesn't just give you information, it gives you an imagination, it gives you a vision, it gives you a narrative, a story of the world that you're in. And you only get one master story. And so if you spend all your time in one story with the same plot line, the same villains, the same heroes, the same quest to how to fix things and how to make the world better, and you only kind of dip into this other Christian story once in a while, it's just not going to work. And so what we're trying to do in this series is not just give you here's the information, here's the theory on how to be a Christian. We're also trying to give you a positive vision and imagination for what it could look like to actually follow in the footsteps of Jesus, like the way of Jesus, a Christ likeness in the midst of this actual place in real life.
And I think that is one of the reasons I'm really compelled and excited for this series is because I think maybe in our generation, the natural tendency has just been to pull away, because you have a lot of the evangelical church that was so engaged on one side. There's kind of like this bitter taste in our mouth of like legislating morality and all these other things that have come up that there's almost kind of turned to some kind of apathy at different points. And then there's also specific issues that have reignited that apathy out of apathy into interest again. But having that positive vision, I mean, having that compelling positive vision of not only the information, like you said, but this is what God has designed and how you can be engaged in this in a Christ-like way is really, to me, a very compelling perspective that I'm very excited about in this sermon series.
Yeah, and I think I want to actually talk more about that. I want to talk more about like kind of how this might hit what we hope for those that are apathetic and maybe for those that are like really engaged. Before we do, it's interesting. As you were talking, it makes me think it's almost a misnomer for us to say this is a sermon series about politics, right? What this is a sermon series about God and His kingdom, and it is calling us to meditate on that as that is lived out in the political dynamics in which we live, right? And so, I mean, the shorthand for it is it's a sermon series about politics, but I think it puts the focus on the wrong place, right? If it were about politics in that sense, it wouldn't be a sermon, right? If we were about politics, it would be a lecture, but that's not what we're doing. It's about God, right? It's about a God-centeredness, and it's about our identity in His kingdom on earth as it's played out in a certain sphere. So it makes me wonder, actually, do you think it'd be helpful if we think about like these?
If we give a voter guide, is that what you're going to say? Do you think it'd be helpful if we told people exactly how to vote for everything?
For local judges. Yes, that's right.
The ones you can never find any information on. Like I don't know.
No, but I think like, would it be helpful to give people our sermon titles, our working sermon titles?
Whoa, we've never done that before.
No,
give them a heads up.
That,
yeah, let's do it.
I'm wondering if we do it off the top of my head.
So here, we can pull it up, or should we?
Let's see what we can do.
Wait a minute.
Last time you tested
But what if they don't want to listen to some of them and they just like tune out for the ones that they don't want to listen to?
We won't tell them who's preaching which one.
Oh,
we're just gonna tell them the title.
Okay, fair enough.
And then they can guess.
Okay, so to start, because I think you brought up something interesting. So the series is called Politics, and I think that's a good distinction you're making. And this is where the podcast is helpful, because this is probably something we're not going to have time to talk about in the actual set of sermons.
Mm-hmm.
But I would want to say that the word politics, the problem isn't that we're talking about the kingdom of God, but we're calling it politics because of how that intersects. I think what we've done is we've shrunk the idea of politics down so small that all we're talking about is typically federal government elections. So like very few people are thinking about city council, though you might be, and that would fall under that sort of like sense of a government, professional politician rubric. But politics is basically, I think Jamie Smith said it's the art of living with difference. And that's how politics has always been. It's basically, if you want to have people who have a different set of priorities or who are just different in any way, like any kind of family, if you want to get past the like that family structure, that kind of kinship structure that unites you, and work with anyone from an outside place, outside of like the immediate family place or like the tribe, you need some way of going about that, and that's politics, which means that every single person is engaged in politics, and that means that every Christian, like the kingdom of God, is therefore eminently political. And we don't like saying that, because what we think it means, based on our definition, is that we're reducing something so large and
like
overarching.
A theocracy
as like, well, this is just a way you should like vote, or we're dragging God down into our political mess. But in reality, I think a broader understanding of politics actually helps us understand why a sermon series on politics would cover things like the fruit of the Spirit, things like how to be loving, things like how to think well and love God with your mind. Because what we're talking about is how we interact with each other in a societal kind of way. And so like that's a really interesting difference that I think is both a helpful distinction and one that shows off how we've lost our understanding of what politics really is because of our distaste with it. We've shrunk it down into this thing we can sort of exclude to the side and say, I'm not political. Everybody's political. There's no way to abstain because we're talking about living in a society with difference. So that's a really fascinating thing. And to deal with that, the sermons are Following Jesus in the Frenzy, which is kind of an introduction in the frenzy of politics. What does following Jesus look like? Then there's one on that I called "Why Are Things So Crazy?"
That's a great sermon title, by the way.
Like politics. Why are they? Because at some point it does seem the volume is high, and I think an understanding, at least an examination, a little bit of why. Why do things get so heated? Why this topic and not another one? Do things get so divided and heated up? What's that about? Then there's one on patriotism and the kingdom of God, which is about how you kind of navigate both being patriotic. How do you love a country or a nation that you're a part of and be devoted to the kingdom of God and your heavenly citizenship? What does that look like? How do you navigate that? Then there's one called God and Government, is it a different title now? Christians in Government?
Christians in Government.
Christians
We
in
haven't quite landed, but
and that's going through Romans 13 and talking about what is the way that in this kind of classic text the Bible would say, what's the posture we're supposed to have towards like the government in general. So how do you look at that? How should we be thinking about them in this sort of general way? Then there's one is there a Christian political platform? So going to Mark 12,
October 11th. Mark your calendars.
Brian will tell you what it is.
That's right. Is there a Christian political platform?
Because that's one of the big questions is, so are Christians committed to one particular platform, or are they committed to being cross-platform, or how do you think about it? Are they committed to one issue or other issues, or a set of, how does that all work itself out? And I think we can go to the Bible and find some wisdom for that, and also find a lot of grace for others as we look at that. Then after that comes the lens of love. The lens of love in politics, talking about what it means to actually love, to follow Jesus' commands, to love your neighbor and love your enemy in politics. What does that really look like on the ground? Then there's how to think in the age of sound bites, which is essentially about the idea that I could probably nutshell it and say political parties tend to succeed by keeping things more simple than reality, and by kind of using that to get people on, using sound bites to convince. And for a Christian to love people as their, as love their neighbors as herself and love God with all their mind, you're going to need to think past sound bites.
That's why you will hear us say the word nuance a lot in these discussions.
Nuance is going to be a big deal.
And if you don't like nuance, sorry.
And that's where I think, and that sermon in particular is trying to make the case that while we can't all be professional, theoreticians and think through everything all the way down, like every time on every possible issue, we need to be people who have a posture that says that loving God with all your mind means trying to correspond to reality, not correspond to talking points. You have to. And in as much as the talking points overlap with reality, that's great. But if they don't, then you need to be someone who loves God enough to say, I need to love the truth more than I love the talking points. Yeah. And how do you do that?
And to show your age, I think the original title for this was like How to Think in an Age of Bumper Stickers.
It was. Yeah.
And then we realized that bumper stickers like aren't really a thing.
They're not a thing.
Actually, the original was how to be political in the age of beepers, I think is what it was.
Yeah. When you get that mimeographed platform. So then
thinking well in pager code. Remember pager code?
I remember pager code.
Yeah.
Vaguely. I should have I wasn't that cool.
I remember it vivid.
You were that cool. That's
You also had bleached tips.
Dude, that was the same time as my pager. I had a pager and I swore, I told my mom, I will never get a cell phone. Never get a cell phone. Those sellouts out there. I have a pager. That's all I need. Those people with cell phones, they're ridiculous.
What a short-lived superiority there.
Exactly. I do enjoy that.
All right.
Okay,
after that
is
soundbites.
The Way of the Cross and Politics, which is one of the ones I'm looking forward to the most. Because it's going to talk about how Christians are called to follow Jesus in a posture of self-sacrifice and not considering equality with God a thing to be grasped, but as opposed to a posture of grabbing for power. And it's going to talk about how does God want to change things in the world? Like, how does that work? How does that look? And how should we then kind of, what should the aroma of a Christian be in a place that tends to thirst for power, and to have politics revolve around that so heavily? How do we navigate that without, of course, running off into a monastery or these other things? Are trying to, like, what does that look like, and what is the way of the cross, and how do we follow it? How do you take up your cross daily when it comes to politics? What a crazy question that is. That's not asked really ever.
Yeah.
And then we will have is that after that one's the election?
Yep.
So then we'll have an election. That'll be on Tuesday.
We will know the results within 3 weeks or so.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. At that point, I don't know what's going on. That's part. I mean, so funny. That's part of the heat of the rhetoric is all these expectations about what's going to happen. Who knows? Yeah. But after the election,
the Sunday after the election,
we will have a message called "Politics, Hope, and Eternity," which is basically looking forward. A lot of the Christian perspective on politics is connected to what comes next and how that plays with what is happening now. And that kind of overlap and interaction is massive. And I think a time after, assuming we know something, some people are happy and some people are sad. That's the time to talk about how what comes next impacts now and what hope looks like. And then the week after that...
By the way, I just want to say, we say that the happy, sad thing...
Right.
The reality is there's a lot of complicated emotions. There are people that I know who will feel maybe devastated. I'm like more than just sad. Like I don't want you to misunderstand.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or I don't want to overlook the fact that some people are you can be so engaged in this it feels like devastation to lose, or it feels like salvation to win, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of heavy emotions in here. I just wanted to.
That's helpful because those words can be flippant. Like, totally. Yeah, I think that's right, and I think
I don't think that's how you meant it.
But hopefully by then, too, there will be after 9 weeks or 8 weeks of this, there will be a burgeoning posture in all of us, to where none of us are elated, and everyone's a little bit sad. I would suggest that's the proper. In fact, yeah, I thought many times that like there's a lot of Christians who, no matter who wins, you need to be at least a little sad, because the kingdom of God isn't here yet, and if that's not on your radar at all, there's something a little bit off. I'm not trying to take away from the idea that certain values and priorities are so strong and so valid that you can be excited. I'm not trying to take that away, but there is a way that to be people with a foot placed firmly in both places, not just one. There's always a tinge of sadness, and in a church body where politics is not the defining factor, there's always a little bit of sadness that comes just with empathy. Always, always, always.
Yeah.
There's never a way to be just elated. You're always a little bit of empathy. There has to be. So it is complicated. I think complicated is the right way to say it, because it's a complicated mix of things. But hopefully by then we'll have a taste of what that's like, and then to cast a vision for where our real hope is and what eternity looks like, and how that eternity is explained for us, especially as you get to Revelation, in very political terms, because it's talking about living together and what that looks like in the kingdom of God. What a better time than to look at that. And then after that, the week after that, we'll have one called Unity in Politics. I think I gave it. This one needs to get fixed because it's got like 3 colons in it at some point. The politics colon Unity in Politics colon. I think it's how to stay political but not partisan at Cornerstone. And the idea is that a couple weeks after the election, we're not going to be done talking about politics. Politics it would be a factor even if things felt calmer. And so we need to be a place that knows how to be united as we discuss things that we're going to have differences on. And like a family, we need to be able to talk well about it and not fracture and come apart. So what does that look like practically? How are we going to move forward as a church when political division probably isn't done, on November 6th?
And, and we firmly believe exists among genuine Christians.
Absolutely.
In our church family, right? So, okay, so with that, I think that there's almost a couple of different, that's super helpful. And actually, that makes me really excited. Again, every time I look at it, every time I think through what this is going to entail, it makes me really excited, both for, I think, how the Lord's going to grow me through just this meditation on Him in the kingdom of God in this context, but also for our church family. I think this is a really important investment and step forward and clever. And I think a lot of us are just really, really hungry for some guidance, for some genuine wisdom, for some biblical wisdom to navigate these areas. And so as you think about that, we can talk about how there's different people with different political convictions. But Matt, you mentioned something earlier that I think not only on the political spectrum of left versus right, things like that, there's also a significant difference in how engaged people are. I think some people feel really strongly engaged and really invested in the outcome of the election, and I think a lot of other people feel just really unengaged. Like it doesn't make sense. The whole thing seems like a mess. Like I don't even know why I'd engage. So just as we sit and look forward to this sermon series, what would you want to say to, let's say something to each of those groups. What would you say to the unengaged as they approach this? And maybe even say, 10 weeks, like this is like, there's too much of this already.
Right.
Like, why are you spending so much time? Like, what would you?
I'm already sick of it.
I'm already sick of it, and now I'm gonna have to go to church every Sunday morning. I'm gonna tune into church.
Church was a place to be like safe away from it, and
totally.
now I have to hear about it.
Yeah. So what would you want to say to those that are unengaged as we enter into this sermon series?
I think I resonate with that. Like personally, that's probably where my proclivities tend to lie. Is like I there's so much going on. There's so much coming for both sides. There's so much just kind of coming and so much volume that it's like I just kind of want to excuse myself from that level of noise and kind of find a different place to be. That's probably my more natural reaction. And there's a couple of reasons why, as someone with that natural reaction, I would still want to do 10 weeks and think you should still listen. One is just that there's a calling on our lives to participate. Loving your neighbor as yourself isn't something that you can sort of slice and dice however you want it. And God wants us to love our neighbors ourselves, not because He's giving us arbitrary commands, but because He thinks it leads to our flourishing and our neighbors flourishing. And that's the kind of world He wants us to be a part of, making a society He wants us to be a part of participating in. And so politics is part of that. Whether we like it or not, it affects our neighbors. And so loving your neighbor means you have to deal with it somehow. You can't just walk away. Walking away means that you are in a position where it doesn't affect you in a way that you have to pay attention. And that's not loving your neighbors yourself, is to take advantage of that position and then kind of, walk away. But the other thing is, I think there's the reason why you want to walk away almost all the time is because you look there and you kind of are saying, whether you're consciously or not, like, the things I love, the things that I care about, they're just not here. They're somewhere else. And this discussion, this conversation is so heated that it's just not a place. I'm not seeing Jesus flourish. I'm not seeing those things here. And I think that if we read our Bibles correctly, we want to say, no, we need to find a way to be able to picture, to envision, to understand how Jesus is present in these things in a way that calls us to himself, in a way that says, the thing you love about me, I can draw you towards in this context just like any other. And so why in the world wouldn't we want to take something that feels so off-putting, that feels so like such a mess, and say, and Jesus says, I want to show you how I can be in the midst of this, and I can make you a powerful witness and someone who brings love and peace in the midst of this. Why wouldn't you want to enter that conversation that was so off-putting before and be like, wow, I see the Jesus I love compelling me further in. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? And that's what this series is in many ways about, is Jesus has a presence in this place, in this political place. And he wants us to be a city on a hill, not just in the context that we're like, yeah, let's do this one. He wants us to be a city on a hill here. He wants us to be people who have a hope and manifest the fruits of the Spirit and know how to love with, peace and kindness and believing all things and enduring all things. Like, you don't just get to like excuse yourself from that. And why would you want to if he has something like that for you there? And so to me, that's the best way of thinking about this, is thinking this is a place where you get to go somewhere that you thought was just a mess and find the very things you love the most in the very middle of it, in a way that you never saw before. Why not expand, your vision that way?
It's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And I guess if Brian represents the less engaged or can resonate on that side of things, I feel like I represent the more engaged on this side. And I think for those who are on the extremely engaged, and I would say we have quite a few in the church on variety of sides. Our church is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I don't know if everyone understands this. There are people in the church who work for mainstream media companies like the Los Angeles Times. There are people in our church who have written for places like the Federalist. And so you have kind of a wide range of political engagement in the church. Yeah. But I would say there is a good amount of people who are politically engaged, like I said, on a variety of sides.
And actually, I mean, when I think about that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry to cut you off,
no,
but I want you to go. When I think about politically engaged, I think it's not just like they are doing things, but they care deeply.
Right.
And you said earlier, like, salvation, but I think in some ways, like, it's actually more about fear. It's not that, like, if the thing I want to happen happens, everything will be right. But it is, if the thing I don't want to happen, everything is going to go wrong, right? Like, and it's going to be devastating.
To be engaged is to have your emotions as a part of what's going on.
Yeah, your emotions tied. Yeah, I say the media companies, not as those people being engaged, but that we have all sides on
which is important to underscore.
Yeah,
I think it's possible to assume a lot about the people that are in the church.
Absolutely.
In a lot of ways, we're all susceptible to it. But just so you hear it from us, there are people on all sides in our church.
Well, and there's a lot of assumptions that can be made about the church for a variety of reasons.
And let me just quickly clarify. Not on all sides of every issue.
No.
On all sides of the political spectrum. Right, because like
there's like
there are
entire community groups and we're gonna that are just communists.
Yeah.
But
no, we're gonna get to this as we talk about political platforms and things like that. Like we're not saying that no uniquely Christian principles exist. Right, there are things that as a Christian, there are principles as a Christian that we have to value. But when it comes to the outworking of that, how to bring those things about on the modern political spectrum, we have people on all sides of that.
Well, and I would say, If you have certain assumptions about where the church is at on a political spectrum, my guess would be you're wrong. And so the thing I would say to the people who are engaged, whose emotions are tied to and connected to political outcomes or political parties or ideologies or whatever it is, I would say the lens that you normally think through these issues on are political lenses that need to be just put to the side and probably replaced with a biblical lens. And that's what we're trying to do. I hope and pray that for those of you who are politically engaged on all sides, this sermon series would critique, correct, reform, and reshape the way you think about and engage in politics. And I'm not saying that you're all doing it 100% wrong, but it's so easy, and it's going to be so easy for a lot of the people who are engaged to listen to these sermons and think, yeah, the other side really struggles with that. And you can do that with any sermon we preach. You can say, yeah, other people really struggle with that. I hope and pray, and actually as we go into this, I would encourage everyone who's really politically engaged, and really everyone in the church, to pray and ask God for a lot of humility, to hear truth from God in the midst of divisive, complicated, political, partisan world that is very divided. It's so easy to hear in our own lens and not actually just hear from what God is saying. And we're not trying to provide a specific partisan lens. We're trying to speak and communicate truth and principles from God and His Word that shape, correct, and reform the way you think about and engage in politics. Again, I'm not saying we're trying to get you to change your position on specific issues or what party you're registered to or anything like that. We're trying to reshape and change and reform the way that you think about, the lens through which you see and engage in politics, to be a biblical, God-honoring lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the best phrases I heard just in some of the research for this is that the challenge is to stop filtering your faith through your political lens and start filtering your politics through your faith lens. And it's so hard that almost all of us think we've already done it. Like, that's how hard, it's so hard that we think we've already done it. And I thought that was a really great way to put it, because that's the challenge for all of us. Whether you feel disengaged, you feel like you've done that, and that's why you're disengaged, or you're engaged, you feel like you've done that, that's why you're engaged. And the challenge is to love God and to love our neighbor enough to say, even though it's hard, we should be called to do it. And that's where the joy is in letting our faith, letting Jesus Himself be the one who we filter things through.
It makes me think of the fact that what we are seeking to do is also not just help us to think more biblically in the content or like theoretically, but to live more biblically, to have the biblical worldview and Christ-likeness to fill us and imbue our thoughts, imbue all of our engagement, right? Which makes me think that one of the things I would encourage, whether you're disengaged or engaged, one of the things I would encourage you to look for and try to both bring about in your own heart and also look for as we teach about this are the fruit of the Spirit. Like, the thing we are praying earnestly for is that we would engage in this in love, with joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and self-control. And I think on all sorts of political sides, what condemns so much of, even when people claim it to be Christian thought, is when it's completely absent of the fruit of the Spirit. And I think that just like Jesus taught that they're going to know that we're His disciples by the way we love one another, I think we're going to know that there's something genuine. There's something actually important to the way we're talking about and thinking about politics, because of it's interwoven with how we do it, with one another, with how we do it as a church family, and even I think how we do it over these 10 weeks. Because I think that we can't be the genuine church without taking 10 weeks to talk about politics in a way that is strikingly different than the way the world talks about it. And so I think it should not only be different in content, but it should also feel shockingly
just
different.
feel very different. And that's one of the main themes that'll run. I mean, there's probably 4 or 5 different kind of themes that run through the whole series, but one of them is that the way that we think about and discuss politics is at least as important, if not more important, than what we think and what we discuss about politics.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only reason a series looks like this, with so much emphasis on like the lens of love and like how did they, like, why aren't we talking about the real issues? Well, because those are the real issues.
Yes.
If you want to talk about the Bible, shaping you, those are the issues. And the other things are very important. It doesn't mean the other things aren't important, but it means that if we want to weight things the way the Bible does, we're going to weight them that way.
Don't we all like feel that tension, right? We're like, okay, wait, you're going to talk about like love and being kind to each other, and like, I think we all feel like, okay, get past that and talk to the real issues. And I think that exposes the way our worldview has gotten tweaked from the biblical worldview that God gives us in Scripture.
Worship, like genuinely worship Jesus Christ, who accomplished things by becoming insignificant in every conceivable way. And who then said, follow me, make disciples who look like me. You can't worship that, like a God who is like that, and then turn around and say, that's all great, but those don't work. And that's part of the way of the cross. And there's more to talk about there. That's a really complicated. I'm not saying that you just sort of abstain and like, of course not. There's things that we're called to do. There's things we're called to be. There's ways we're called to engage, and those have practical ramifications. But at some point, we have to reckon with the fact that God changes things like yeast in dough. Like the way that the Bible is set up and the way that Jesus' life works, the way that Paul's life works, where he's constantly talking about, I know I'm in prison, but it's for your glory. It's like, this is how the gospel works. I get relegated to some random, cave or like house in Rome for like years on end, and I write a couple letters that don't seem like anything. Like this is 12 really scared men, that became 11 because one of them sold all the other ones out. This is how this stuff, and so at some point you have to reckon with what the story of Christ means as your story, and how that's going to inform how we think about a world that says it's got to go in the other direction if you want to make any political change, if you want to really be effective, if you want to get away from what you fear and get towards what you love. It has to look like this method. It's going to be really hard for a lot of us. We swim in that a long time and have for a long time, but that's where some of the challenge is, and that's where faith comes in, and living by faith and not by sight. And I would suggest is actually a decent amount of sight, just in looking at Christian history. Like, there's plenty of ways that you see how this actually works, but the rhetoric just spins you up. And so for us, it really is about meditating on Christ and meditating on Jesus and what it means that really is God in the flesh, that shows us what God is like and says we ought to be like God. We ought to be Christ-like. What does that mean in this world that tells us the opposite all the time? It's going to be hard, but it's going to be good. It's going to anchor us, I think, in ways that a lot of us feel unanchored right now, because I would say that for a lot of people are in some ways a little bit engaged and a little bit not. They're just overwhelmed. They're just sort of like, I am both scared and not scared. I don't know what to think. I don't know how to just begin to enter into this space with it. So I try to avoid it, not because I'm like disengaged. I don't like it. I just don't know what to do. And to be anchored in Christ and feel like you have a way of being that you didn't have before, I just find it so compelling. And I think for myself, going through it for 10 weeks is going to be very, very helpful. Even though I'm doing a lot of the preaching, I'm learning with you, because we're looking to posture ourselves like Jesus in a world that's political. So what does that mean? And let's do it and find our flourishing and find Him there, bringing the joy that He brings as we go.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited about that. I think it is going to be really, really good. I think it's going to be good for us as individuals. I think it's going to be really good for us as a church. So thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. And we will see you virtually as we begin to talk about politics on Sunday.